All right, so let's take a look at that questionnaire on the existence of God that you completed as a part of your thought primer. And what we want to do is track your responses to those 7 statements to see what kind of pattern emerges with your agreement and disagreement, and then to understand what the significance of that agreement or disagreement with these claims are. So if you don't have your questionnaire in front of you, pull it up, go get it, then return and watch the video, because you want to be able to play along and have fun here. All right, so the first statement says this: for someone's belief in God to be rational, he or she must have objective evidence supporting this belief. If you agreed with this statement, you are an evidentialist. You believe that in order to have a rational belief in God, you have to be able to justify that belief with some sort of objective evidence. Okay, faith alone isn't sufficient in your mind to justify believing that God exists. Now, if you're an evidentialist, maybe you're a theist evidentialist. Maybe you are someone who believes that God exists, and you believe that God exists because of the evidence that you've seen. So, for example, I was standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon about 20 years ago, and this woman standing next to me said, "I don't know how anybody can look at this and not think that God is real and that God exists." And so in her mind, there's all this evidence around her of this sort of majesty in nature that seems to be the product of something divine. Okay, and so you might not accept that as a sufficient justification or sufficient evidence, but the way that her thinking process was a rational one. I see this Grand Canyon, I see it has these features, therefore I conclude that there must have been some sort of a divine creator. That's an evidentialist theist. Of course, you could be an evidentialist atheist. You could be someone that says, look, I look at what's going on in the world, or I look at the way things are, and this serves as evidence to me that God does not exist. Based on the evidence that I see. When I look at things like the Holocaust, or I look at various genocides or cancer in kids, I come to the conclusion that this is evidence that no God exists. And then finally, you could be an agnostic. An agnostic is not somebody who hasn't made up their mind or figured out whether or not God exists. An agnostic is somebody who denies that we can ever determine or have knowledge sufficient to answer the question, does God exist? It's an unanswerable question to the agnostic. They say you cannot know whether or not God exists. Not that I don't know, but nobody will ever know, at least not in this lifetime, whether or not God exists. And if it's an evidentialist agnostic, it's somebody who says the reason that we won't know is because we don't have access to the objective evidence that would justify a belief in God, and that objective evidence is required to justify that belief as an evidentialist. Now, if you disagree with this statement, it just means you're a non-evidentialist. Okay, so you're not an evidentialist. You think that there's some other way to come to knowledge about whether God exists or doesn't exist other than objective evidence. Statement number 2, it is possible to demonstrate the existence of God through rational, objective arguments. If you agreed with this, you're the kind of theistic evidentialist that I just described for you standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, and it's probably an indication that you believe in natural theology. In other words, you can observe things in the world, and you can see in those things and the way that they're arranged and the way they operate evidence of what you believe is a divine power at work. You can use your capacity for reason to understand how the universe operates in a particular way, and you can see in those patterns kind of a divine mind, that the nature is a reflection of the divine mind of God. If you agree with this statement, that's probably kind of what you're thinking. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't think that faith is real or that faith can't be experienced by people. You just don't necessarily think that it's required in order to have a belief in God that you think is justifiable. Now, if you disagree, what that means is you probably reject natural theology. You don't think it's possible to look out at the events of the universe or the structure of the universe and see in that evidence of some divine creator. Statement number 3, objective evidence cannot decide the God issue, but there are practical or subjective reasons for believing in God. Okay, so if you agree with this, you're a non-evidentialist theorist. You're probably what we would call a religious pragmatist or a subjectivist. A religious pragmatist who's somebody who says, look, There isn't objective evidence to prove the existence of God, so we don't even want to look there. But having a belief in a divine power is useful. Okay, so you might think that somebody who is going through a recovery of some kind and they have to sort of accept a higher power. That's a really important step for them in being able to move forward and rebuild their lives and deal with whatever it is, addiction, whatever that they're dealing with. And so you can see there's a real pragmatic value. Or you might just think like, look, I don't know anything about much of anything, but the world that I choose to embrace is the world of my mind. It's the world as it appears to me in here, and I like that world with a God. I'm not really that concerned with objective reality in any way. To me, I'm more focused on my sort of mental reality. And in that mental reality, I like there to be a God. Now, statement number 4 says, belief in God must be based on faith alone and cannot be justified either by objective or by subjective reasons. Okay, so if you agreed with this, you're a fideist. I didn't know that, did you? You're a fideist. A fideist is does not think that a belief in God is properly justified by appealing to evidence. This is the person, the fideist, that wants the belief in God to be justified by some revelation, some leap of faith, but something that is unique to the individual and not just sort of a fantasy product of the mind. A fideist is someone who thinks that you come to this belief in God by making a leap of faith or by having some sort of revelatory experience. Number 5, God exists. If you agreed, you're a theist. If you disagreed, you're an atheist, and you would have agreed with the statement God does not exist. And if you believed the statement we should refuse to believe that God exists or that God does not exist, then you're an agnostic. So again, keep that in mind when you're thinking about agnostics. Agnostics are not people who haven't yet made up their mind. Agnostics are people who say that knowledge of God is knowledge we cannot ever attain.